Astrology is the myths of the stars and planets, telling the themes and plots of our lives. These stories come to us daily through our satellite, the Moon. She is constantly spinning astro news. Hi, I'm Mary Lynn LeBlanc with Moonwise. This Monday, the planets Jupiter and Pluto, which are both retrograde, meet up for the second of 3 times this year. This is a triple emphasis on some concepts related to the union of these two planets. Jupiter and Pluto come together approximately every 12 to 13 years, and most of those times they only conjoin once, not 3 times. The last time we had 3 meetings of Jupiter and Pluto within a year was in the mid-50s in the sign of Leo. They announced the beginning of an explosion of creativity in the entertainment world, beginning with Elvis Presley. Back in April, Jupiter and Pluto conjoined at 25 degrees of Capricorn. On Monday, they meet again at the same degree, but this time they're both retrograde. Joining me once again to talk about what these two planets represent is Daniel Fiverson. Welcome to Moonwise, Daniel.
Thank you, Marilyn.
What say you about Jupiter and Pluto at this point in their?
Well, I think you touched on something interesting. I think by now everybody knows that there are 3 what are called great conjunctions this year between the planets Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. We had Saturn, Pluto in January. Now we have the 3 conjunctions of Jupiter, Pluto, and the year is going to end in December with Jupiter and Saturn. So it's a fun-filled, event-filled year, and we're right in the thick of it. What's interesting about this middle conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto is what you referred to is the fact that they're both retrograde. Generally, when we get 3 or 5 or 7 retrogrades of the outer planets going back and forth over each other, it's only one retrograde at a time, which causes that second meetup. But the way it fell out this year is almost immediately after that first conjunction in April, about a month later, they both went retrograde, and they've been retrograde ever since. And now they've come together again at that same point. So it really creates a much more intense meetup. Western astrology likes to refer to retrogrades and say that maybe it's somehow diminished, or it's not working as much, or it's working, less efficiently, or so. But I see it entirely differently. To me, it's the analogy of holding an hourglass up to the sun and focusing the light of the sun on a single point. We all did it as a kid. We burned leaves and maybe an ant or two, and we all had that in us, I guess. I'm revealing my crazy childhood. But the point is that the energy is focused in a single point over an extended period of time, and it drills down into that point of the zodiac intensely. And it creates an intensity which causes us to look inward and go backward. We go down, we go in, and we go back. And what's happening is we are getting a repeat of many of the influences that have brought about all of the events, calamities, diseases, pandemics, political issues of this year are all getting revisited and to some degree being reenacted or continuing their unfolding by really going back and intensifying the energies again so that they can work. The reason that these energies take 3 times to do it, especially Pluto, if we have a Pluto transit, we all know all too well how intense it can be. And so Pluto transits generally are spread out over more than one occurrence because it takes 2 or 3 treatments, if you would, like acupuncture or being on a course of antibiotics, in order for them to affect some work on us. And so we're in this middle. We're right now in that middle conjunction. And what also is intensifying it is the fact that it's occurring at the solstice and at the Cancer solar eclipse. So this is a very, very intense period that we're moving through, and we can expect to see recurrence of all of the themes that have affected our world and changed our reality, and what we have called normal since March.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing that's interesting, what you were just saying about Jupiter and Pluto, those two planets together do represent an intensity of change in and of themselves, and an overload of focus on how things can evolve or become differently. Right. And as I mentioned in my introduction, back in the 50s when Pluto was going through the sign of Leo, and it spent a long time in that sign. And we had this whole change in the entertainment, the type of music that became popular, et cetera. Now it's in these two planets are in the sign of Capricorn, which has a much heavier, serious note and has a lot to do with our structures, the way we organize things, our governance, our leadership, our authority, et cetera. And consequently, I mean, we're seeing issues on large scales. I mean, between the last conjunction and now, I mean, look what's happened with race issues, with the way blacks have been treated, and the ongoing killing of people in situations where you would think that there's no reason for that kind of violence, and those are signatures of Jupiter, Pluto, of extreme destruction, for example.
Well, from an astrological perspective, Jupiter. Well, actually, let's start with Pluto. Pluto holds the template, the blueprint of our karmic and evolutionary intentions. It carries what we have brought with us from the past in terms of where we have been and where the soul is intending for us to go, and that translates to the choices that we make, to the desires that we have. Pluto is the reflection of those deepest desires from those evolutionary intentions, whatever that happens to be in each individual case, whether it's to become rich or to become smart or to become enlightened, and the choices that we make and the desires that we have are the reflection of it. Jupiter is the growth factor. Whatever Jupiter touches, it expands. It makes bigger. So what we have is all these karmic evolutionary intentions, and here we're looking at it on a planetary level, on a collective level, being augmented, being enlarged, being brought to our attention. And I think it's interesting to look back at when Jupiter and Pluto came together in Capricorn, which is only every 250 years. And the last three occurrences of them are quite telling in terms of history. The three incidents ago in 1272 was the last Crusade. So it was the end of an entire era of this massive, epic, revolutionary polarity between East and West, and it was finally the recognition by the Western patriarchy that their attempts to overrun this other world religion were futile, and they gave up, and that was the end of an entire a couple of decades, almost in a centuries of warfare. In 1522, Martin Luther posted the following year, Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses. It was the Reformation. It was the entire revolution within the Catholic Church. And the last incident was 1771, and we all know what happened in the 1770s, which really, for me, it could be one of the clearest reflections of the time frame that we're approaching.
Yeah, and just to bring that back to basic meanings of these symbols that we're using, in this case, Jupiter and Pluto. Jupiter, besides representing the the enlargement of something, the development and overgrowth, perhaps. It also represents cultural things, such as the differences in religions that you've indicated with the Crusades and with the Reformation. It represents Black culture, Jewish culture, any distinctions that we make.
It's our belief systems.
That are formed, cultures that are formed around a set of beliefs. Because ultimately one of the things that Jupiter does represent is our beliefs, our assumptions about the world, things that we think hold certain groups or
but
concepts
we believe to be
together.
True. Right.
And Pluto is about that, the evolution of it, and sometimes for things to evolve, something needs to be destroyed.
Right.
Unfortunately,
two things cannot exist in the same place.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, what we see in the human world is a mismatch of that because sometimes there is a deception that goes on.
So how many people are on the earth? We have that many different versions of that belief.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Exactly. And this is part of Jupiter as well. And I think of Jupiter as we relate it to Pisces as well, where everything gets kind of fuzzy and blurred. And, I'm just thinking in terms of the color of a person's skin, the fact that we make those distinctions, but on the inside, you could open up 100 bodies, to do autopsies and not see the color of the skin, and maybe wouldn't even know what color that skin was.
So it's like a natal chart. The natal chart does not tell you what color the skin is, their
I'm
gender, the religion, any of that.
So
right?
I guess what I'm saying is there's superficial things
right.
that cause all this disruption.
Right.
You're listening to Moonwise here on KSFR 101.1 FM or streaming on the web at ksfr.org, where you can always listen to podcasts of this show, Moonwise, as well as make a contribution to KSFR. Keep this local public radio station alive and healthy by hitting that donate button and supporting this station, especially if you are a regular listener to KSFR, or if you've just lit upon it and like what you hear, this is an opportunity for you to support hearing more of it. It's time for the Moon Minute. Stay with me. Daniel Fiverson, my guest, and myself, Mary Lynn LeBlanc, will be back shortly. Welcome back to Moonwise. I'm Mary Lynn LeBlanc, and today we're talking about the planets Jupiter and Pluto coming together for the second time. They were together back in April, was it, Daniel?
April 4th.
Yes, April, in the sign of Capricorn, and they're actually at the same degree they were in April, but they're retrogrades. They've gone back to that degree, but by degree in minutes and seconds and all of that, on Monday, the conjoining or conjunction, we call it, will be exact. They'll do this again later in the fall, one more time as they're moving forward at a lesser degree or whatever. One of the degree that they're conjoined at, and it's the second time, has to do with values, actually. And what value we see out of that. And I think in the examples that we've sort of given at the beginning of the show of Jupiter and Pluto and the excessive destruction that we've seen in the world today, and the excessive cruelty that we've seen in the world, and obsessions with control, et cetera, that these have to do with certain values that people have. Whether they're positive or negative isn't so much the point, but what can we make of it?
Right. No, you're absolutely right. It's about a clash of beliefs, and it's one of the things, without digressing into the U.S. chart, we're having a Neptune opposition. So there's this huge polarity of beliefs, not just in our country, but around the world. I think it's interesting, Mary Lynn, perhaps to look at some of the nuances between these three conjunctions and how they differ, how they're the same, and perhaps how this the sequence of events in this because this is a single event in three acts, to see perhaps how it's unfolding. And like you said, at the first conjunction, everything was direct. All the planets were moving forward in the sky. And there are a couple of other wild cards here. They're in the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn was in Aquarius at that first meetup.
Capricorn, you mean Saturn?
I mean Saturn. Saturn was in Aquarius at that meetup. So the undertone, the entire underpinnings of all this Capricorn energy has an Aquarian flavor to it. It's radical, it's rebellious, it's unstable, it's sudden, it's disruptive, it's interruptive.
And if I can add, it also shows that that the state of things is in need of reform, which is what
it's
Aquarius has a radar for. Oh, there's a need for something different over there, something innovative. I'm gonna.
Promethean. It's Promethean.
Yes.
It's forward-looking. Yes. The June 30th conjunction has all of them retrograde. Oh, the other thing that is a factor here is that Pallas Athena has been conjunct all these outer planets for months, has been weaving back and forth over them as she went direct and retrograde as well. So Pallas Athena, there brings in the interplay of patriarchy and matriarchy. To me, she is the symbol of the matriarchy. She is the woman in a man's world. She is the woman who stands up and asserts her power of her gender, of her personality, of her intelligence, of her wisdom, to match any male sky god who she happens to confront. She stands there. She's the daughter of Zeus. She stands in her own power. And she has empowered each of these planets as she passed with her wisdom and has passed her wisdom on it. Interestingly enough, these last two conjunctions that I referred to in 1700s and the 1500s also had her present at the time of their meetups, though it didn't happen three times, it was only once. And this time, as I said, we have the solstice and the eclipse at the same time.
I think okay. I just about Pallas Athena, which I think is an interesting point. That what has shown up in the news lately is who will Biden choose as his running mate, and of course, he said he would choose a woman, and several of the women that he's had on the list that he's been considering have been women of justice, women lawyers. They've had judicial positions in government, et cetera. And of course, Amy Klobuchar has said, don't choose me, choose a woman of color, which puts someone like Kamala Harris right up there on the top because of her credentials as having been.
I think he should choose Oprah.
That could be Jupiterian, and Oprah has a lot of strong Jupiterian energy. But she is not, and I think I've heard her say this years ago, she's not interested in being a political figure in that regard at all.
She wants to work behind
and
the scenes.
we've seen
she was responsible for Obama.
And we've seen enough of Hollywood politicians. I'm sorry. But not that Oprah is from Hollywood.
No, it was an aside.
I know it was an aside, but I would hope that is not the case. Not that Oprah isn't a good person. Not that I don't like Oprah or anything like that. But I think we've seen enough, not just in this administration, but in previous administrations, of people who know little about what it means to run a government. I think if there's ever a time that we need people who have the professional background.
Well, the administrator. We need somebody who's a real administrator.
Well, who knows how to run a government, because it's not a business.
Yeah, right.
That's a big mistake. It's not a business.
Right.
So anyway, that's
right. So what makes this middle conjunction so interesting is that all of these planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pallas, and Pluto, are all retrograde this time, all moving in unison. Even though Saturn is at 0 degrees of Aquarius, which is the most potent degree of Aquarius, it's loaded with Aquarian energy. It's just pure Aquarius. If this was a palette of paint, it would be pure red before it has any yellow or blue mixed into it. And so even though it's in the next sign, it's literally pulling these Capricorn planets forward into that archetype, because it is the underpinning, it is the ruler of that sign that they're all in. Interestingly enough, in November, when these planets meet up again, they will all be direct again, and this time Saturn will be back briefly in Capricorn. It will have crossed the cusp and gone from Aquarius into Capricorn again, and have rejoined it, which will revisit and re-empower that authoritarian element in what's unfolding in the world around us. And Saturn has really been responsible for so much of what has happened since the beginning of this year. And people aren't noticing it because it's all Pluto and Jupiter, it seems. But Saturn is the man behind the screen.
Yeah, Saturn moves back into Capricorn at the beginning of July.
Right.
So, a week, next week.
Right.
So this is there's going to be that shift of energy. Yes, Saturn in Aquarius is not. It's the structure that we see of it in Capricorn, but it's not so stuck in maintaining everything exactly the way it has been.
Saturn used to be the ruler of Aquarius.
Well, yes.
Right.
So it has this kind of recognition. I like to think about the concept of karma here. It's like, we have an issue that we've produced a structure that has worked for a while, but there's a part of it that has become dysfunctional. And it's been dysfunctional for quite a while,
250 years, 6,000
years. Yes, exactly. And so with Saturn in Aquarius, there would be the recognition of, finally, the people that are operating that structure are recognizing the dysfunction and doing something about it. And I'm going to support that. I'm going to help them get the things they need to actually make that correction. That's the distinction I see between Capricorn and Aquarius.
There's a Promethean and an Epimethean process here. The way that I see Saturn, because I see Saturn as a co-ruler of Aquarius. And what that tells me is what that reveals is, roughly one third, Jeff Green said this, that roughly 1/3 of people who have prominent Aquarian or Uranian influences in their chart want things to change, like all Aquarians do, but they want things to change by going back to the way that they used to be. And when this next conjunction comes up, and we have Saturn back in Capricorn, in my opinion, we're going to see a tremendous push, not just for normalcy, but a regression, a pushback, a repression, a suppression of a lot of the Promethean energy that has been emerging in order to somehow quell the unrest and what's going on, and it's going to come from the top. What we have been seeing in the streets has been coming from the bottom up. We're going to see something that's going to be top down.
Well, we'll see what we'll see what that looks like. That's kind of I don't know. I'd have to ponder that. I'm not sure I'm in total agreement with you on that one. But any other things you want to say about this particular conjoining of Jupiter and Pluto?
I think that on a personal level, we can all take advantage of this by really recognizing what it is that really is pertinent to our survival, to our essential authenticity, to what it is, to the core desires of who we are and where we're intending to go as people in the world. To let go of what no longer serves us, what we have picked up from our gender or perhaps our parents, our religion, our culture, our geographic place in the country, our nationality, all of those conditioning layers, those onion skins of conditioning that have overlaid us, which is all Saturnian, that in many ways has altered us and distorted us away from this original truth, this original purity of being of who we are in our soul, and has overlaid us with all these other fears and anxieties and things that we think we need that are simply surrogates for what is true.
All right. Well, Daniel, thank you for being my guest once again here on Moonwise. You can be reached at...
I can be reached at Daniel at the number 4 evolutionaryastrology.com or on my website, the number 4 evolutionaryastrology.com. You can find me on Facebook, Facebook/Evolutionary Astrology. I post forecasts on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, by sign, by day, by what's happening, by whatever it is I think you might want to know.
Well, thank you once again. And you can always reach me by emailing me at moonwise@ksfr.org. Coming up next is Climate One. This is KSFR, White Rock, Santa Fe Public Radio.